Hi guys, so in this video we're going to go over reading comprehension tips number 4 through 6. Quickly to recap, in the intro video to reading comprehension and in tips 1 through 3 we discussed how you should approach the actual reading material. In this one we're going to focus on the actual multiple choice questions. So like after you've done the reading, you're ready for the questions, some really common but like high level points to get you the most bang for your buck. So summarizing and active reading and breadcrumbs, which are the 3 tips we've discussed, I said that's like where you're going to get the most benefit if you start doing that, but maybe that's like 80%. I'm just throwing around some numbers. But let's say you need that last 20 or 10%, so you need another 20%. So that other 20% improvement is going to come from approaching the questions in a more intelligent manner. What are some of the big things I can recommend? So tip number 4, probably one of my favorite things, is to be active on the questions. We talked about being an active reader, active on your reading. Well, guess what? You can be active when it comes time to do the questions. So what exactly does that mean? So if you're active on the questions, that means you're playing offense. So what does that mean specifically? It means you are predicting. So let's say you read a question and says, what do you think this passage is about? Now you can do one of 2 things. You can either read the choices or you can predict what you think an answer should be. So come up with what your own perfect answer would be first. The reason I'm telling you to do that is that I don't want you guys to be doggies. So don't be a doggie. Here's what I mean. If you're first reading their choices, then they're going to send you on a wild goose chase. They're going to have you thinking about like, well, does that choice make sense? Does that choice make sense? And remember, they've put a lot of effort into tricking you with these choices. So you're going to be like a doggy playing fetch with confusing answer choices. So I want you guys playing offense and not defense. So what that means is don't match your understanding to their choices. Match their choices to your understanding. So in other words, you've read the article. Let's say a question like, what do you think this passage is about? What's the main idea of the passage? So come up with your own answer. Once you have your understanding, you're simply going to match their choices to your understanding. So you're going to quickly see like, oh, that's closest to what I came up with. You're going to find that helps avoid confusion. Whereas if you start with their choices, you're going to start to second guess what the passage is about. All right, so that's kind of about that. And also, so what's so great about offense? Offense is faster and avoids confusion because once they give you a confusing choice, it's very hard to get unconfused. It's possible, but that's why I recommend getting it right the first time. Now, that said, you're not always going to want to predict because it's not appropriate. You don't overuse this or misuse this. It's not appropriate for every type of question. And sometimes you will have to go forwards and backwards. So you look at the choices, you kind of think about it, you go to the article. So this is just a tip. So it's like a heuristic. Don't use it all the time, but keep in mind it's very valuable, especially for certain types of questions such as how do you think the author feels? Like what is this? These high level questions, it's really, really great on those. But even the detailed ones, like in the context of this passage, what does this word most closely mean? Those sorts of questions. Come up with what you think it means. But again, like I said, there's some questions where this is inappropriate. So with that said, let's move on to the next tip. All right, so tip number 5. Oh, and by the way, I should mention about the previous tip. Even if predicting does nothing but help you eliminate wrong answer choices, it's still useful because now you have fewer choices, right? So don't worry if what you predicted isn't what they have, but it may just help you think like, whoa, some of these are really off. Definitely not right. All right. So with that said, let's get to tip number 5. So this is what I call half-truths. What are half-truths? I'm a little bad in my notation here, so I'm kind of grouping 2 things. So I should probably technically separate this out, but I'm referring to things that are literally half true, which I'll explain in a second, or things that are true but irrelevant. So things that are half true. So for example, you read a passage about how Bob likes to ski and he likes to eat apples. So in one of the choices, they may ask you some question. They say Bob likes to ski and he likes to eat oranges. So I've really dumbed it down, but there half of it is true, half of it's not true. It's not going to be that easy, but watch out for these because they're going to try to lure you in with something that is true and then slide in something that's not quite true. So that's with those. The other one, which is even sneakier, is they'll give you a completely true statement. So let's say I read a statement about Bob's food preferences, and they'll say, today's a sunny day, and that might be a true statement, but it has nothing to do with the passage. Or it might even relate to the passage, but it doesn't answer the question. So it might be true, but irrelevant. So that's why I call it half true. There's some truth to it, but it's not what you need. It's not true in the sense of being the correct answer. All right, so these are trap choices. Tip number 6. Watch out for extreme and or judgmental choices. So just to help you remember, just think extreme versus boring, but I'll group judgmental with that as well. So if a choice uses words like never, so for like the author would never go on this trip versus the author would be unlikely to go on this. So unlikely is a safer or more boring. So with boring, you might want to think safe. We're not looking for the most mind-blowing answers here. So when you see these multiple choice questions, oftentimes some choices are so boring you kind of look them over and they don't feel like they're a great match. But that's a little bit of a trap because some choices are so extreme or they're judgmental, whereas the passage maybe wasn't. So watch out for that. If they're like, oh, this is a terrible discovery. Well, if it was a very factual article, that word terrible is a judgmental word. Whereas a boring word might just be a discovery was presented. Well, that sounds pretty dry, but it's the answer. So watch out that you don't fall for these choices that sound like really exciting, but they're extreme. So pay attention to these. Stay away from these in general. Not all the time, but usually. All right. So I'll kind of leave it there, but I do want to mention a few more things. So I've only given tips 4, 5, and 6 here, but there's really a ton of other tips. So like, I'm sure if you guys have ever bought any study book for a standardized exam or anything, there's many more tips. I didn't want to overload you guys and just give you tips for the sake of giving you tips. I'm really trying to give you the ones that will give you the most improvement in the shortest amount of time to really make a dent in your performance. So yeah, if you feel like, oh, I needed like an extra tiny little tip, either, go to some other resources, feel free to comment and ask me about it in the videos, below the videos, private message, whatever. So like, for example, like what would be another tip? So if there's a word and they say in the context of this passage, what does this word most closely mean? A common tip you might get is you need to get enough context. So don't just read the sentence with the word, maybe read 1 or 2 sentences before it, a few after it, and not just for that line. So that's just an example of a really common tip you might hear. So I've tried not to give you things that you probably already know fairly well. So, but keep in mind, this doesn't cover everything. I'm just trying to give you guys like the real good stuff. Okay. And again, I didn't want you guys to get lost in the details. So make sure you've mastered these tips 1 through 6 before you go and search for hundreds of other things. All right. And finally, if you have any questions, comments, you want to share a specific passage question you got tricked on or you can't figure out, anything at all, reach out and share with others, and I'll see you guys in the next video.